Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Hammers and Dice podcast. Tonight, it's just myself, Randy, and John.
What's up, guys?
So we have a topic that John and I have both been kind of eager to discuss for a while. We see but a lot of comments on our podcasts, and then also just like throughout the community, not just on us, but like Facebook, all the different social media groups.
Reddit, YouTube.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion that can be a little bit hostile, and not even just towards us, but just in general. Like people tend to get very heated talking about this. So we figured, what better way than just dive into it and embrace the hostility head on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Maybe it's a need to talk. I think it's a need to talk. So
yeah. So what we're going to be discussing is LAAC versus WAAC, which are acronyms for win at all costs and lose at all costs, which I did have to Google because I've heard them before, but I never actually knew what they meant. So that's what they mean.
Yeah.
And the heresy community is a bit divided on what the definition of narrative play is versus competitive play.
Yeah, or what even competitive play is, right?
Yeah. I think on one end of the spectrum, we have the Warhammer 40,000 competitive stuff, like Legion competitive. I'm sure there's a bunch of other games that have the competitive edge where what these players are doing are literally just trying to build the most ass-kicking lists they can possibly find, regardless of how ridiculous they might be within the context of the universe that they're in, right?
Yeah.
With Warhammer 40K, if for whatever reason, Ogrins become super overpowered and you have a list that's just a bunch of Ogrins, and that's what people do, right? Like,
and it's not just like taking stuff too. There's also it's also a mentality, I think. I think efficiency is how I view personally, like the competitive scene for many games is what's the best unit that can do this thing I want to win for its points cost.
Yeah.
And we could dive into more of that later, but that's how I see it too, is the attitude of like, what's the best? I will only take the best thing.
Yeah.
Because like, why else would I not take the best thing, right?
And there tends to be, obviously there's an appeal to that to people who have a competitive nature. You want to be the best at something. But it also, on the other side, it has a lot of burnout, which we get a lot of players who have been in that scene kind of get over it, and a lot of them come to Horus Heresy because they don't want to deal with it anymore. Especially with games like Legion and Warhammer 40,000, they do regular balance updates, which I don't know if they really balance the game so much as tip the scales to another type of unit. So instead of the unit that was just good being the best, now the points have changed in such a way where a different unit is now the best. And these people scramble to rebuild their armies and find the most cheese way to build their lists to that. So it's this constant grind, and every few months you're dealing with updates and having to revamp your lists to stay on top of it if you really want to be in that competitive scene, right? On the other side of that, ostensibly you have games like the Horus Heresy, which, we have the term narrative, right? Which is a banner that I think a lot of things fall into it. Here's the problem. A lot of people have their own definition of what the term narrative means in this context, right? And different communities have different definitions of that. And that's where I see a lot of the hostility coming, because your definition of narrative might not be the same as my definition of narrative. And if you're looking at something that I'm doing, you're like, that's not narrative,
people usually think, narrative just means like canonical, right? If you look at Star Wars, like stormtroopers are white, like 99% of the time, Yeah. If you look at historicals, like historicals are all about using what's canonical based on like research that people have done for armies. In Horus Heresy, it's kind of hard to do that because 40K is such a big universe, and even Horus Heresy is such a big thing where for the longest time, people said that, it's narrative to shave off the Achillas on all your dudes. It was the Emperor's Children thing to have an Aquila, right? But now it's like, the Aquila is a symbol of loyalists. Like the Spartan, when it launched, came with an Aquila on it. So it's like, well, what's, is that narrative? Like, what's going on here? So even canonically, there's a lot of debate of what's actually narrative or not.
to break it down on the, like, let's say we're on the extreme end, if cheese competitive is on one side, and then if we're talking about what's the opposite of that, if you're going to see someone who's like fully embraced what narrative is on as far from competitive as could be, you've got someone who read Fulgrim, right? Read the Fulgrim book and is like, here are these units that these guys are in this battle, and these units are in this battle, and I'm not even looking at what's good or bad within the context of the rules of the game. I'm just trying to match my list as closely as possible to the book that I've just read.
Yep.
Right. And to me, that's the extreme end of that. And what you have happening there is, and there are cases where you can get lucky and that can be actually like a pretty decent list. But what lands up happening a lot with someone who just does that is the lists tend not to be very good. Obviously, this game is based on the fictional universe, and we're all trying to immerse ourselves in that narrative when we play this game. But I think there's something to be said for wanting to have a good game. And for us and for our community, that involves optimizing your list a little bit so that you're on an equal level with your opponent in terms of the types of things you guys are bringing. And so you're going to hopefully have a relatively close game and not have one player. Obviously, skill comes and luck comes into it. You could just have terrible luck and just in turn one, you're screwed. Anything can happen in a dice game. But the hope is that your lists are balanced enough against each other that you can enjoy going back and forth with each other, not knowing who's going to win the game. To me, those are the best Heresy games.
Yeah, right? and I agree, because I think the synthesis to the WAAC and LAAC, or the narrative and competitive thing, is you want to have a fun game. So if two people want to bring the most OP Custodes list or Legion list or whatever, and just want to see who could win the fastest, great, that's fine. If that's fun for you, then that's fun to you. And if you don't care about, on the other hand, right, if you don't care about the game itself, if you just want to fully paint your third company Fulgrim dudes and then put them on a table and walk forward and roll dice, if both you and your opponent want to do that, that's fine. That's valid. The issue is when you have a discrepancy where you have someone who doesn't bring a super strong list with the intention of winning as fast as possible versus someone who does do that. So that's not a fun game because you get stomped. On the flip side, it's also kind of unfun, at least in my opinion, where you bring a decent list. Maybe you have some strong units, maybe some units that aren't as good or as efficient, and then you play against someone who does have their super narrative army that's fully painted and looks really good, but just will die in 2 turns because he didn't have any Terminators, or he just brought like 100 tacticals and no Voxes, so they're stat assisted 2 turns or whatever, right? It's also kind of not fun in my opinion, because then it's like, it's a game, right? And while all forms of gameplay are valid, like me and Randy, and when we talk about, and in the cast, we're those kinds of people where we want that kind of middle ground, where we like close games. We like it when people bring good things but don't overboard their list. And I think this discussion isn't really seen in the Heresy community of like, hey, let's bring things that are good, but also stay narrative, to reel in the competitive players, but also remind people that, hey, this is a game, right? Like, there's a rule book. Things are good. It's a board game where we want to have fun rolling dice and not just making dioramas. And again, if people want to make dioramas, great. But if I'm gonna play a game at the local game store, I would want like a close, fun game, not like a game where I win in 2 turns because you didn't take enough scoring units or you don't have any Legion Elite, so my thing stomp you, right? I think that's kind of where we're at.
One thing I want to bring up, there's a guy I met at Palm Springs Open. His name's Morgan. He actually just started his own podcast, and they're on like the very narrative side of it. And it's actually a very interesting podcast. You guys should all go listen to it. It's called Shadows of Chagoras. They're all in on the narrative side of things, right? What they care about is, what are the names of my characters? What's their backstory? And that I admire people who get into that level of detail. I personally don't have the patience for it. I'm terrible at coming up with names and stuff, but like, I mean, that's not to say I don't want a theme for my army. All of my armies are themed, and there's a lot you can do within the narrative where each of these armies are 100,000, 200,000 strong guys. There's going to be chapters within these legions that are built different ways, and you can come up with your own narrative for why your build would be the way that it is, right? So I don't think you can say it's not narrative to have your Blood Angels lists have a lot of cataphracti. There's going to be chapters in the Blood Angels that have a lot of cataphracti because that's the specialty of their praetor. So
I actually just saw a visual on the new campaign book for Saturnine that's just 60 Saturnine Terminators as an army.
Yeah.
And that would be kind of brutal to play on the table. But like that's narrative, right? That's a thing, you know?
So you know, within the confines of what's narrative or not, you know, there's a lot of leeway there. So you know, when we're talking about a little bit of list optimization, that you can bring the narrative to that, and you can go like, hey, you know, here's my semi-optimized lists, here's the backstory for it, and here's why it's built this way. And you know, you're still bringing the fluff, you're still bringing the immersion. Hopefully you've painted your guys, and so you're getting, you know, a beautifully painted army, you know, on armies against each other on the table. So, you know, we still want that immersion. You know, this is not to say like, oh, I don't want a narrative game. I do want a narrative game. But, you know, like John was saying, when you're playing against an opponent, the best way for you both to have fun is for you guys to have balanced your lists out. So a lot of times what we do on the podcast is we talk about what's good and what's bad. And that's not to say these are good units, only take these good units. It's trying to help people be like, hey, here's units that are really good. If you take a few of these, maybe balance them out with some bad units. And that's a way you can also introduce a little bit more fluff into your list too, is like, say you do really love, you know, I'm doing Emperor's Children right now. So like all the units in my head are Emperor's Children, right? But like, say you really love Phoenix Terminators, in my opinion, they're pretty bad right now. If you want to take a squad of them, in my mind, it's perfectly acceptable to balance that out with a stronger unit like a Seeker Squad or, you know, a Command Squad, something that's going to punch a little bit above their weight, because right now Phoenix Terminators punch below their weight. They're not there. So that's what we're talking about, is trying to help people see through the fog of war and be like, okay, here's the optimized units. Maybe don't include all of them. Pick the ones that work the best with your theme, and then pick a few units that are more for fun. And that way, you know, within your community, you're all going to have good games.
And it's ultimately, I think, unit strength, you know, talking about the more competitive side, I think there is a sliding scale of how you judge how good a unit is. Let's take points for an example. So, for example, a Reaver Assault Squad, compared to a Veteran Assault Squad. A Reaver Assault Squad costs like 70 to 90 more points than a Veteran Assault Squad, and I forgot what they get. I don't even think they get anything.
Reavers get like precision 6.
Precision, yeah, but for 70 something points,
they're not really worth.
They're not really worth that much, you know. Or a Command Squad versus a Chieftain Command Squad. The Chieftain's worth like a little bit more, but you get so much more abilities. That's kind of like a more general way of seeing how good a unit is. And then there's the super nitty-gritty of like, okay, this is my favorite example, that if you have a heavy support squad of last cannons, you should just take Predators, because Predators cost less per last cannon shot than heavy support squad. Like, that's like the other end of crunchiness, where it's like, okay, that's when, in my opinion, I think that's trying too hard, because you're really looking at the nitty-gritty of what's the best point per last cannon shot, or how many bolter shots compared to a Volkite Culverin squad is better, you know, stuff like that. And I think that zooming in too much, if that's, in my opinion, that's where it gets too crunchy. I think there's very few people in Heresy that play that way, in my opinion, or my experience.
But to build on that, I think one of the things we have to recognize as well is this idea of balance varies from community to community. And this, I think, is where we get to the sticky part, where the way we play in our community, let's say that a bunch of us, you know, Reed can speak more to this when he talks about Las Vegas Open, because he was the EO there and saw a lot of stuff. But like, say a bunch of us go to Las Vegas Open, with our lists that are very balanced for our area, and we play some guys who, like, I saw some pictures from that event and I was like, what the fuck? This is like a nasty list.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sure if you spoke to those guys, like, according to Reed, these were all like really nice, cool, chill guys. Like, maybe in their community that is balanced and that is narrative, and that's the way that they all play. That's the level that they play at. One of the issues with social media in general is you kind of get blinders on to people who have different perspectives from you, right? And you tend to just be like, well, that's not how I do it, so fuck you, But when you're talking to someone online, perhaps it's best not to assume that they're intentionally being an asshole. Maybe when you're discussing like lists with people, maybe either that is balanced in their community, or maybe they just don't know, and maybe they're newer to the game, they just don't know how strong what they're talking about is. So like those are things to consider when you're talking with people that you don't know personally. Like, hey, this person's coming from a completely different point of view from me, even though we're playing the same game system. We're in communities that could be playing this game very differently. I listen to some podcasts that are based in the UK, and I think those guys play more aggressively than we do. A lot of the lists that I see coming from there, like, I was to bring one of those lists, one of our community events, I feel like it would probably be a bit too strong, and people would be like, "Why'd you bring that?"
And I think that's the issue as a heresy community, the wider community. I think that's the issue with not being honest about how competitive we are, because we just have this attitude of like, oh, if you take something relatively strong, or if you say the word meta or whatever, right, it's like, oh, you're trying too hard,
Yeah.
So it's like hush. But then you're into situations where this community tends to take stronger units, but not too strong units. Maybe you're taking 2 tac squads and rhinos with havoc launchers and 2 Kratoses, for example, and maybe that will be pretty strong. I mean, maybe in your community that's not as strong. Maybe they take harder shit, right? So you have this imbalance, like Randy was saying, and I think that stems from the fact that we're just not honest about like competitiveness. I think Old World, because I play Old World, I think Old World is a good thing to look at for heresy players in terms of how the community just treats that. Like, Old World has competitive tournaments. Old World has data sets of which factions are doing well. People take good stuff. There's no kind of stigma to taking good stuff. People know what the good stuff are, and people are able to kind of reel themselves in for the most part, because everyone knows playing Beastmen with like 4 Bray Shamans is OP. Playing Cathay with 6 balloons is like insanity. Like, why would you do that, you asshole? So it's easy to roll that in.
Yeah.
Even though like there are competitive scenes where people do that, and it's fine because that's competitive. But good luck promoting a heresy competitive event. Like, the internet will eat you up. But because of that, I think it leads to this kind of, are we actually competitive? Well, we are, but not really. Oh, but we're not. Yeah. I don't.
That's the problem when you go to a heresy narrative event that is a larger heresy narrative event, right? Where people from multiple communities from different areas of the country or even the world are coming to. That's really the issue that I've seen, is that you have people who have different ideas of what narrative is, and these lists that just aren't balanced against each other. So you have some players who have like beautifully painted, like very thoughtfully narrative themey lists, getting absolutely railed by some other guys who also have beautifully painted, nicely themed lists, but their themed lists are just much more optimized because that's the way they play in their community. And that, to me, is never a situation that I want to be in. And I don't know that there's an easy answer for that, right? Like, there probably isn't an answer. That's just one of those things where, I mean, I guess you would be putting a lot of onus on the event organizer to literally be reviewing every list and speaking to every player individually and be like, hey, your list is too strong. Hey, your list is not strong enough. And like, I don't think that's a fair ask. I mean, obviously event organizers can and should have limitations on certain units that are obviously too strong, right? But whatever limitations they put out there are not going to ever really be enough to stop someone from going full cheese if they wanted to. Should be reviewing lists just to make sure that things are legal and whatever. But like, I think it's too much to ask an event organizer to get to that nitty gritty of a detail, because you also don't know when certain lists go into each other, how their weapons or units are going to interact with each other. Because, you know, if you bring a super tank heavy list against a list that's got all anti-tank, the tank list's not going to do so well, you know, and that's part of the game, right? Some lists are just made to counter other lists very well. And that's just one of the quirks of the game. But I'm not even necessarily talking about that. I'm just talking about, like, if you are just building for full theme, not caring about how strong your list is, and you're going to an event where there's people who care a bit more than you do, if you have any interest in winning your games at all, you're probably not going to have the best time. And I know there's guys who are like, I don't care about winning. You know, I just want to, like, go to these events and have some beers and play and roll dice, and whatever happens, happens. And I admire that mindset. I don't have that mindset myself. For me, I'm like,
on the flip side,
you know,
right?
I'm not going to cry if I lose, but it's a game. Like, I want to win. You know, I'm not going to be a dick. I'm not going to cheese the rules. I want to have a fair, close, even game and hopefully win that game, because that's I do have a little, like what you were saying, like, I do have a little bit of that competitiveness. And I think there's a stigma to that, like you were saying, and there shouldn't be. Just saying you want to win shouldn't be a bad thing. We're playing a game.
Yeah.
You know, a game where there's a winner and a loser.
It's a sliding scale that people forget about.
Know, yeah, there's a scale. And I think you recognizing that you have an interest in winning is helpful for knowing, like, okay, I want to win, but I don't want to be that guy, right? Like, I don't want to create a list so strong that I can't lose. I want to win fairly. I want to win in like a close game. As a community, we should be open to accepting that that's part of the game, is wanting to win and, you know, wanting to have a fun, close game.
And I think it's possible. I think saying you want to win doesn't necessarily mean you're taking things because the point per shot is really good or whatever, right? I think you can want to win and still reel yourself in. You know, it's not a black and white thing. And I think as a community, we need to stop just dismissing people the moment they ask what's good. Or, like, I freaking hate this when people say, hey, like, I'm starting Heresy out. I know how to build an army because I read the rule book, because I'm not a 5th grader. You know, I read the rule book. I can build an army. Like, what should I take? What's good? You know, or is this, I really like this unit. Is it good? I hate it when people say, oh, just take who cares? The rule of cool. Like, I kind of hate rule of cool now, because it's such an excuse to, like, not just take whatever and not think about what we're talking about. Like, figure out, like, what's a good loadout? What's a bad loadout, right? You can't just say, oh, rule of cool everything, because, again, it's a game. And while you should take things that are cool primarily, you should also be aware how they function in game, how they interact with the rule set, with the mission, with other units. So you're having a good time, right?
And to build onto that, this shit's expensive. Like, this is not a cheap hobby. You know, it doesn't feel good to spend hundreds of dollars on a fancy unit that sucks and that you never want to bring again. I've built some units over the years that I thought were going to do better than they did. I didn't understand, you know, their role within the game. And perfect example, the Kratos, beautiful tank. You know, when Heresy first started 2.0 and that came out, like, it was one of the first things I bought. And I, like, played it in a few games and I was like, this thing sucks, right? And I, like, probably didn't touch it again for 2 more years. And now that tanks are a little bit better, it's still not great, but it's a little bit more playable. So I've probably used it in more games in the last few weeks than I have in 3 years. So, you know, that's a unit that in retrospect I wouldn't have bought, and I would have saved myself some time and money painting it. That's one of those things we can kind of help new players avoid, especially if you're trying to get people into the hobby and excited about the hobby. You don't want people wasting money on things and then playing a few games with it and being like, oh, this sucked. Now I have to go spend $200 more on something else. So
I've definitely seen people get turned off by this game because that happens. They have this super cool unit that they take and it performs abysmally or is useless. It's like, wow, it sucks. You know, not everyone is the Armies of Parade guy who just doesn't care what he has and win or lose. Some, you know, people, it's a game and people want their toys to be fun to play with, right? And on the flip side, right, I've also seen people lose interest because their army is super strong, because they just demolish everyone because they happen to take what's good and no one else thinks about what's good. And then they just keep winning games and then people get bored and move into something else because it's not fun. Ultimately, we want to have a fun experience, and And we're of the opinion here, and with this cast, that fun means a close game where you and your opponent bring equally powerful things that can lead to a fun game and not just a stomp.
Yeah.
Right.
To kind of get into, it's like, okay, this is what we're saying we should do. Like, how do you do that, right? How do you accomplish that within your community? I think the first step to that is just hopefully you guys have a Discord group in your communities and just talking to each other about your lists, what you're interested in, showing each other your lists, and your community will naturally, I think, I mean, ours does, like, create the balance within itself. If someone's sharing a list, people will say to that person, like, hey, like, you should add some better stuff, or hey, that list feels a little aggressive. And, you know, before you even start going out and buying and painting models, like, craft some lists, share them within your community and get that feedback. And you'll know from that feedback generally if you're going in the right direction. And obviously your first list isn't going to be perfect. Even getting feedback from people, you're still gonna, you know, want to alter things because it's gonna be based on your play style. You know, even if someone's giving you advice, if they don't necessarily play that same army, they're not gonna necessarily have the same experience, but they'll know enough generally to be like, hey, ease it back a little bit, or you can do a little bit more. But just having that dialogue and those conversations with people is the best way to keep the game balanced within your community. And, you know, that's not to say that you're going to travel to an event and everyone's going to have balanced games. We said that's probably never going to happen. But like, if you're in a community of like 5, 10, 15 people who are all trying to have regular fun events and games with each other, like, that's the best way to keep things kind of on an even keel and have everybody enjoying the games that they're playing.
Yeah, and on to build on to that, you know, don't be afraid to tell people their list is annoying. Like, if someone, you know, posts a list and it's like 30 Varigir,
Saturday
Night Terminators, just like in the book, you know, like 30 Varigir, you know, in 6 Land Raiders with 3 tax squads. I don't know if that's 3,000, but something like that. Like, you know, don't be afraid to be like, hey man, that's kind of brutal. We should probably tone that down.
Or like a bunch of like really strong allied detachments, you know.
Oh my god, actually, yeah. So this is my soapbox again with allied things, because I play Mechanicum. This is my opinion, but I think if you take like a Magos just for Battlesmith, I think that's an example of like, okay, then you're like steering towards the hyper efficiency thing, because Forge Lords exist, Tech Marines exists. Oh, but Magoses are cheaper. Well, that's the problem, right? Is now you're just like trying to figure out what's the best bang for your buck, you know. Too much in that case, right? That's perfect. Getting allies to fill in holes in your list, I think, is kind of, that's moving in a direction of too competitive. It also gives me echoes of 7th edition 40k, where you had like Saint Celestine allied with Kairos Fate Weaver and some Eldar Farseers, because that's the most efficient way to use Psychers. I don't know. So yeah, like, try to avoid that. But that mentality comes from that, well, it's way cheaper, or this is better at that. It steers away from the narrative and more towards getting things just purely because they're good, for their points costs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of when we're talking about wanting to still be narrative within your lists. If you're taking Space Wolves, you know, close combat force, but then you're allying Raven Guard ranged units, that's, you know, sure, you could maybe concoct a narrative for that, but taking cherry picking units from different legions to best fit certain roles, like that's where things are going a bit too far, right? Like John said earlier, it's a sliding scale. So you have to kind of catch yourself with stuff like that and be like, am I really doing this for a narrative reason, or am I like trying too hard with?
And then trying to justify that with a narrative, like, in this book, the Space Wolves and Raven Guard allied. It's like, no, you're just doing that because it's a good combination.
Like, because last edition, you know, Fury of the Legion, that, you know, I think there was one battle in one book where there were a bunch of dreadnoughts fighting on a ship, and so, you know, people would point to that and be like, it's narrative, and it's like, yeah, but also fuck you. You know, like, it's not real. Like, you're not doing it because it's narrative. maybe 1 out of the 1,000 players that did it in the first few months was actually doing it for narrative reason. The rest were like, oh, this is really strong. And, the rest of the community banded together and was like, you know what, fuck that. No Fury, like Fury of the Ancients. Like, that's not going to fly. And, the community has been good at recognizing things that are too strong for the sake of being too strong, and just moderating that. And that speaks to the fact that I think that this is on the narrative side of the scale. Like, we don't want to just take the strongest things, because that's not what this game is. And I don't think anybody got into this game for that reason. If you're watching this and you are that kind of player, like, you shouldn't be playing Heresy. This isn't the right community for you if that's truly what you care about. I mean, it's fun every once in a while if you're with a buddy and it's like, hey, like, let's just bring all our stupid, crazy shit and just have a crazy battle. Like, that is fun, but like, that's not the thing you should be aiming for in every single game, right? That you should be trying to have more of a just balanced, fun game.
Yeah, because you'll just, you just won't have a good time, right? I mean, again, like, if you and your buddy want to just bring the most crazy list, sure, but as a game, like, your community, I don't think will have a good time if that's what they want. Like, Heresy is, like, Games Workshop has on record said that Heresy is a narrative game primarily. Just even looking at the FAQs, right? Games Workshop doesn't really support Heresy with balance updates, because Games Workshop doesn't believe Heresy needs balance updates like this. Like, if you compare the balance updates of 2.0 from Old World, like, it's night and day. Like, Old World got a huge recently got a rebalance. As an example, infantry sucked in Old World, so they got a bunch of new rules to make them better. Heresy didn't get anything like that. Heresy just got like clarifications or whatever. Like, you didn't see any kind of, like, dreadnoughts were never nerfed in the entirety of 2.0. Contemporary dreadnoughts were not nerfed. Like, straight up, if you didn't police yourself with the 1 per 1,000 points, like, Games Workshop did not release any balance updates for that, because again, it's not that kind of game. And if you try to make it that kind of game, I don't think you're going to have a fun time.
I mean, or if you do have a fun time, nobody else around you will. Like, if you're that kind of person who just enjoys crushing people beneath your feet, the people you're playing against are not going to, like, you're going to find very quickly that you're not going to have many opponents who want to play you, because that's not what everybody else is here for. So, if you find yourself being like asking for games, week after week after week, and nobody wanted to play you, like, it could be because your lists are too strong and you need to tone that down a little bit, because it's just not fun playing against someone who's just like, oh man, they're bringing, like, I know this is not going to be a fun game for me, right? We've all been there. Like, you're like, see your opponent's list and you're like, I don't know if it's possible for me to win this game. Even if I get really, really lucky and I'm strategically brilliant, I still don't think I can win this game. So, like,
or it's not a fun process, right? I think, trying to win won't be fun for you. Then that's not.
If you're coming up to the game, you're like, oh, this is gonna be a fucking uphill battle. Like, that's not what you play this game for. Like, unless you're, doing a themed mission where it's supposed to be an uphill.
Yeah.
Right. Like, if you're doing an Esteban 5, then yes, like, if you're playing Shattered Legions at Esteban 5, like, you probably are supposed to be playing an uphill battle. But if we're just talking about like a generic, like, meetup game, within your community, that's what we're talking about. Balance within your community, like, with your local players, knowing that you can show up to a game and not feel like anything is unwinnable.
Right. And on the flip side, again, because it's not just WAAC, but it's LAAC, lose at all costs. You also don't want to be that person who brings a list that just dies in 2 turns because you refuse to do research that, or if you refuse to take a Master of Signal despite having 1,000 points in Deep Strike, like, stuff like that. You also don't want, in my opinion, and I think Randy will agree, like, you don't want to be that person who's just not going to be a good time for your opponent because you just don't know, you don't have a good list, right?
Yeah. And I'll be honest, like, I've had games like that where my list is just a lot stronger than my opponent's, and it's not really a fun game for me. Like, I feel bad because I'm like, I don't think they're having fun. And if they're not having fun, I'm not going to be having fun because we're, like it's supposed to be a shared experience. And if I'm beating you really badly, like I'm like, this is not a great game. Like that's not what I'm here for. I dipped my toe into Legion a little bit last year and I like stopped playing because I was like, I know what I would have to do to be good at this game, and I don't want to do it.
Which is fair. That's totally fair.
Like,
like
I don't want to just be building those optimized units and trying to crush my opponent. That's not why I play these games. Hopefully that makes sense. I think what we're trying to do here is trying to get people to see each other, to see different sides to this, right? And recognize that the narrative is an umbrella. It's a sliding scale. There's gonna be people who view it a little bit differently from you, and the important thing really is that the balance within your community, your local community, like that's what's important, right? Is like that you and your community are on the same page, because having a dick swinging contest with someone who lives across the world from you, it doesn't really matter. Like all you're doing is just like shouting at someone that you're never gonna meet or talk to again. So like why? But just recognizing that their community, their balance, their narrative might just be different from yours, and they're not trying to be a dick. Hopefully, like they're just trying to express what they feel is balance and narrative within their community.
Yeah, I just want the Heresy community to we just need to admit that we're competitive at some level, because we're playing a game where there's a winner and a loser. Like we like to win, and that's okay. Like that doesn't mean we're a hyper competitive kind of WTC 40K player. And even then, like I don't like the whole like, oh, I'm better than 40K players because I play narrative. Haha, those guys wear jerseys when they play dice games and they're like trying to like, that's like their hobby. That's fine. Like doesn't make you a better wargamer. And because at the same time, we also again take stuff that's good. Look at any other podcast. Like there are podcasts out there and YouTube channels that talk about what's good. Like what are the best Terminators? What's the best vehicles? What are bad vehicles? Like it's all over the place. So to say that, haha, we don't think about good stuff, we just rule of cool everything, is like bananas. Like we do care about what's good. I mean, we also take what's cool. We don't just base our decisions on what's purely efficient and strong. We also want to make sure that the thing is cool. But as a whole, I don't think we just take cool things that are bad, right? I don't see many jet bike lists in 3.0, right? I see all these Havoc launchers, right? And again,
white scars.
Just admit that, hey, we like things that are good.
Hopefully that clarified our stance for some people. Hopefully that, shed some light, especially for newer players, because if you're a new player coming in this community, there's some toxic stuff out there, and hopefully it doesn't dissuade you from wanting to join the community, because I do think a lot of the toxicity is mostly online from a small subset of people, and I think within local communities you don't really have that. It tends to be a much more fun, welcoming environment if you find a local hobby group. So yeah, a lot of what you see online is just noise from a very small group of people. Let us know what you guys think, how you guys balance out the narrative within your communities.
One last thought.
Yeah.
Paint your stuff, guys, at the end of the day. Regardless if you play narrative or competitive, like paint your Space Marines. Like Gray Heresy looks so lame, in my opinion, because every model is a Space Marine. And yeah, paint your stuff. That's the one thing I think.
And it's fine to play while you're painting, obviously we're not saying like, hey, if you can't play until your army's fully painted, like obviously you should. It's fun. You can tell what you need, what you still need. You can get games in, but don't leave your army gray for like 6 months, a year. Like, try to at least actively be painting while you're going.
Yeah.
Get a model a week if you can, something like that. But yeah, I mean, when you have two armies across the table with each other on like a a board with decent terrain, and they're both painted. They don't even have to be painted well, but just like they're both painted, from a few feet away, even if they're not painted very well, it looks fucking cool.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here for is that immersion and seeing a couple 3,000 point lists on a table. Like it just looks beautiful. And we want to see more and more of that.
Turn in next week. I'll tell you what units are good or not.
We'll go back to our regularly scheduled content, talking about tactics next time. But yeah, have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.